Welcome back, everyone. This is another episode of TrekWars at OSU, that's Oregon State University. My name is Dr. Joseph Orosco. I'm a professor of philosophy at Oregon State University, and I'm the co-director of the Anares Project for Alternative Futures. The Anares Project is a forum dedicated to exploring the ways in which we can envision a future free of war, exploitation, empire, and oppression in general. And one of the projects that we maintain is this one, TrekWars at OSU, in which we look at mainly the main science fiction genres of Star Wars and Star Trek and other sorts of series to help us explore themes and ideas in social, political, cultural developments in our world today. And so today, a special end of the year episode about what we've enjoyed in speculative, imaginative fiction in 2020. So 2020 has been undoubtedly a very, very rough year for many of us, for humanity. It's been a time in which we've had to deal with the pandemic. And it's important, I think, to reflect on all the lives we've lost and the suffering that's gone on because of this disease that has struck our planet. And there's been a lot of civil and social unrest around the world. One of the things that we like to do at the Anares Project is to look to see how we can learn lessons about how to think and deal with cultural, social, political crises through the use of sci-fi and fantasy. And also importantly, how to think that we can move forward, find solutions, and envision better worlds using speculative literature. So I've invited my Star Wars, Star Trek, our Trek Wars collective to help us think about what's been really worthwhile paying attention to in 2020. So this is the original Trek Wars at OSU collective. I want to introduce first, of course, Dr. Randall Milstein, who is a senior instructor here at Oregon State in science. He is the astronomer in residence for the NASA Space Grant at Oregon State. And then Chris Allaback, former director and founder of Trek Theater in Eugene, now is a professor of theater and theater arts in Roseburg. So I want to welcome you both back. We haven't been together for Trek Wars for a while. I talked to you independently, but I haven't talked to you together for a while. So welcome back, y'all.
Thanks.
Good to be here.
So let's get into this and think about what has been something that you have enjoyed sci-fi wise in 2020. And I'll start us off to get us thinking about things. I hope my background has sort of given a little bit of a hint.
Yeah.
This TV show has come back recently in December. It is a show that TV Guide has said is the sci-fi show that you should be watching. And that's The Expanse. So this is, of course, a scene background here that I have of a Martian warship. One of them turned into the Rocinante, which is the setting for The Expanse. But I really love this show. I sort of came into this late. I started watching The Expanse, I think, when it was still on Sci-Fi. In about season 3, and I hadn't seen the first 2 seasons, and so it took me a while to sort of understand what was going on, but I was kind of jonesing for some really good sci-fi, and I'd heard a lot of people talking about how The Expanse was one of these shows that tried to take science seriously, but had at the same time a kind of Game of Thrones political machination theme going on. And so I started looking into it. I really enjoyed the first couple of seasons that I started watching. And then someone told me, look, you really can't appreciate The Expanse unless you read the books. And so I was like, oh, I'm gonna start looking into these. And that has turned into its own odyssey. It's the series is, altogether now will be a 9 volume series. each of them something like about 400 or 500 pages long. So this is, when you get into the Expanse, it's a real sort of commitment, partly because the writers for the series were interns and understudies for George R.R. Martin. So I think they got the kind of the sense that they can draw out a book series for a long time and have people waiting. And so the last book in the series hasn't come out yet. And The Expanse was canceled by Sci-Fi after the third season, but apparently Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame really loved it and picked it up with Amazon Studios. And so now it has moved to Amazon, and I'm enjoying it quite a lot, partly because what I think about interesting is about The Expanse is this idea of trying to envision what the future of humanity will be like. And it's a much more gritty, realistic kind of picture than the other sort of thing that I really like, which is, of course, as you all know, Star Trek. Right? Whereas Star Trek has this vision of the future of humanity overcoming adversity and being the best that humanity can be, The Expanse presents humanity as it is and probably has always been, but in space with all this marvelous technology, but the same sort of political machinations and paranoias and fears going on. So you do get the sort of political intrigue of humanity spread out across the solar system. And then there's an alien threat. And what's interesting about this is that the alien threat is not something that necessarily unifies us as one race, one species any longer. We all, when the alien threat appears, different factions decide how they're going to take advantage of the alien technology to gain up on one another. So it's this really interesting examination of like human psychology and the ways in which we operate in the face of crisis and in threat, but also a lot of amazing sort of solidarity. So I always look forward to The Expanse, partly because I think that these stories of sort of gritty realism underlying sort of basic human solidarity, these things always really appeal to me. So my vote for the best sci-fi in 2020 is The Expanse. I was wavering because I really like Star Trek Lower Decks. Because of so much of the fan service that Star Trek Lower Decks was doing. There was so much self-referential stuff and so many great stories that were going on here, and ways in which I think that series just sort of really pushed the Star Trek universe too, in ways that I think no other sort of series has done. So I was really torn between trying to choose between The Expanse and Star Trek Lower Decks, but to mix things up, since I talk about Star Trek so much on Trek Wars at OSU, I decided that I would go with The Expanse for its gritty realness. So, Chris, what did you choose for best sci-fi of 2020?
It's interesting. I actually haven't watched a lot of new sci-fi this year because I feel like this year for me has been about like comfort. So I naturally, of course, when the pandemic started, I watched TOS and TNG straight through, and that's sort of where I was, right? I was just like, I just gotta turn on Next Gen just so I can hear their voices, right? But because this is about the year in sci-fi 2020, right now I'm very like disco Mandalorian. I'm sorry, Star Trek Discovery Mandalorian centered right now. And since I always talk about Star Trek when I come to these things, I decided I wanted to talk about the Mandalorian. Even though I kind of talk about Star Wars as not being sci-fi, but it's okay. I think society has accepted Star Wars as being sci-fi, so I'm not gonna argue with society anymore. But and I think what I really loved about The Mandalorian is, well, I was into Star Wars before I was into Star Trek. Because I was young and my parents took me to those movies at the drive-in and bought me the toys and things like that. So that's a very, like, Star Wars is a very comforting thing for me. So I'm thinking like this theme of 2020 being comfort is the fact that The Mandalorian gives me It sounds weird coming out of my mouth. Mandalorian gives me this comfort. Because I have not liked anything Star Wars. I'm one of those Star Wars fans where I just hate everything, right? I don't I haven't liked anything since Return of the oh no wait, I take that back. The Clone Wars cartoons, the first ones that came out between episode 2 and episode 3 were beautiful. Um the artist who did Samurai Jack did those. But we'll say not animated. Okay. So since Return of the Jedi, I didn't like any of the prequels, like most people. Haven't really liked any of the Disney films. And the interesting thing is, like, you talk about fan service, right? I feel like that there is artistic ways of doing fan service and poor artistic ways of doing fan service. And I feel like when I say watch Rogue One, I feel, or any of the Disney Star Wars films, I feel like they're giving me fan service that I don't want. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, oh yeah, I know there's AT-ATs. Okay, now there are AT-ATs in the snow. Now there's AT-ATs in a tropical island. And now there's AT-ATs in a thing like that, right? And for me, I want, when it comes to my fandoms, I want new stories with new characters. For some reason, like, I don't want to know anything more about Luke Skywalker, right? I don't know why I don't want to hear about the Skywalkers anymore. I'm done. I don't want young Han Solo. I'm done. Although that was an interesting film. But anyways, that's another conversation. But The Mandalorian, what I really loved about The Mandalorian was that it was a new character. It was a new set of stories. It was a part of the Star Wars universe that we'd never seen before, like a kind of gritty underbelly, not Jedi focused, right? Part of the Star Wars universe. I thought, like, there's really great character development in that show. Like, even the small characters had really great character development. And also just lots of great cameos, right? They had lots of really great cameos from different actors that I really, really enjoyed. And of course, we got the Baby Yoda. And I can't say, yeah. Anyways, but I just felt it was a great story with great acting and great character development. New stories with new characters, and the fan service I felt was done pretty well, with the exception of, like, and I'll say the very exception. Can we say spoilers here? Are we not allowed to spoil?
We're in the spoiler zone now. We can go ahead.
Okay, we're in the spoiler zone. It's just the CGI'd. They younged up Luke Skywalker, and that just sort of, that it's the uncanny valley thing, right? It just really kind of bothers me. And I always kind of want the unexpected, because I understand it's great. Luke Skywalker is going to come and save Baby Yoda and all this stuff. But I don't know, the X-Wing coming in, I was like, oh, it's Luke Skywalker. And then there's all this stuff. I'm like, oh yes, it's Luke Skywalker. Yes, it's Luke. I know it's Luke. And then I was like, if they really wanted to make this really good, introduce a new character, and I would be totally impressed. But I was like, okay, well, it's Luke. It's what we expected, right? And that was a minor disappointment to me, because I was like, I want new characters. But they did like a really nice Boba Fett, when they had Boba Fett, he came with a new character, and that was really well done. Although I sort of was like, I have this love-hate with Boba Fett, right? I'm just, I like to call it the Boba Fett, I can't even pronounce this out loud. Boba Fettization, because it was just like, but we don't know anything about Boba Fett. But isn't that what's really great about Boba Fett, is that we don't know anything about Boba Fett? So, but yet everyone wants to see Boba Fett, right? Like, so I'm kind of a love-hate with the Boba Fett thing, because I'm like, but we don't know anything about him. That's what makes him cool. But he kind of came in with a really cool fight scene, and he had a really cool weapon, and I was like, all right, I'll go with that. But I'm not. Well, yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that's true. I was thinking about that. I mean, there a lot of these shows, and I think Star Trek too is doing this, is that they're sort of trying to provide us backstory to things that were originally mysterious, that what made them cool was their mystery, like Boba Fett, right?
Right, yeah.
right, what was going on with there. And so, but now we know, and that can be a good thing because it can create a really interesting story, or it could become kind of disappointing where you start to realize, oh, that's not so interesting.
Right. And then we get to see his story now. The next show is going to be the story of Boba Fett. And I'm excited about his partner. I totally forgot her name now. I went back to review it before we started. Now I've forgotten it again.
Nick.
That's it. Right. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, it's kind of fun. He came back and Bib Fortuna. He shot Bib Fortuna. So I don't know. I'll watch it. But right, it's the same thing. It's like, will I be disappointed? How cool are they going to make Boba Fett? Right? Like, is it going to be an awesome backstory? Are they going to show us how he got out of the Sarlacc pit? Because I actually just would really like to know what they come up with.
Yeah, because if you don't know canon, you wouldn't know that he escaped from that pit.
Right. You're just like, here he is. Right.
Right.
But I love the Mandalorian, and it just has it's reinvigorated my love of Star Wars. Because it's just such a great story. And I think Disney should I think Disney should stop making the movies and do more of this long form Star Wars television, because I think this really worked well. And for me, for someone who comes from Star Trek and loving episodic television, this film does a fantastic job of episodic and like long form, because we get a fun little episode, but it fits in with like the longer arc of the episode. So I could watch an episode of Mandalorian alone and be like, find it entertaining. I feel like outside of the longer arc of the story. So I just think it's really, really well done. And I think Disney should focus on that sort of that form now. I think they should kind of put the movies away. But that might be what's, where we're going post-pandemic. We might be going more TV and less film, right?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and I have some thoughts about that, about the Mandalorian. But let's see, Randy, what do you think? What did speak to you most in 2020?
Well, I'm glad I had choices, because I would have said The Expanse, number one, which I binged watched in 3 days, all the seasons, the first 3 days of Shelter in Place in March, and then recently did The Mandalorian in 2 days when I bought Disney for myself for Christmas. So those were on there, but I had a third that I didn't think that other people maybe would have touched on. And that was another Amazon Prime called The Boys, which is really strong and powerful too. And I think it really speaks to our times right now, that it's all about the abuse of power and the consequences of what happens when you have collective inaction among people. And it's kind of this whole fascist cult forming thing that goes on with this big Vought corporation, which is a cornerstone of fascism, is, of course, corporations involved in politics and religion, and that they're marketing these superheroes. Nobody knows they're being marketed to optimize monetization and to corral power. They can hold over the government to start wars and do all these other things. And that really want to play into, you got this main character called Homelander, who is just a few of the highlights that I wrote down for myself. Egotistical, a narcissist, arrogant, corrupt, unstable, and a rapist. That's real interesting, way to form this leader character of the seven. And then you've got, this collection of other things. Then you've got Carl Urban's character, Billy Butcher, who, is so bent on vengeance because he says it's, to help humanity, but he loses his own humanity and basically tries to sacrifice everybody else's around him at the same time. And then is used as a tool by the government, the shadow government kind of, to try to figure out what's going on. Then you have these themes of Nazism, like I said, almost Trumpism, patriotism, Homelander and his red, white, and blue outfit. So I think it's very timely for how we're living here. And then you have the other characters like Starlight, this kind of the innocent country girl who comes in and likes Huey, the young guy who lost his girlfriend to a superhero. Lost her in terms of her death. And Butcher's wife is killed as well. So there's just these very interesting themes that are running through it, and you really get in depth into the characters. Um, I thought,
I love The Boys. This is one that I didn't know about before until I saw it on Amazon. I think I was going through old Discovery, and I saw that and I was like, huh, I don't know anything about this, and I got sucked in.
yeah,
And I think I watched like the first season in a couple of days, like in a weekend, and I was like, wow, this is really pertinent and relevant in all the ways that you're talking about, right? It's a really kind of this reflection about sort of, it reminds me in some ways about what's going on with like the Watchmen, right? Sort of
yes, same thing.
reimagining the superhero genre, but here thinking about like realistically in a real world, you know, how would we assimilate or absorb superhuman people? Of course, it would be immediately commodified and marketed. And then you realize that the people that would be interested in superheroes would, of course, be folks who are interested in eugenics. And that's where you get the sort of white supremacist Nazism of the Vought Corporation, right, which is rooted in real Nazis, right,
Yeah.
according to the story. So,
Stormfront,
yeah,
Asa Cass's character really was. She just didn't age. She was from a Nazi experiment in the 30s or 40s.
yeah,
And you top on top of that, the situation I wrote down this is that Queen Maeve, Dominique McGillicuddy's character, and
yeah.
what they're trying to do to suppress her sexuality is a big theme throughout that as well. And the conflict she has and how she's trying to resolve that and do the right thing, but not give up her status as well.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of really interesting storytelling, The Boys and also like the HBO, The Watchmen,
Yep.
the re-envisioned sort of Watchmen, were some really interesting stuff that came out. I would include in this, of course, Lovecraft Country. If any of you saw that, that's something really worthwhile. But again, this kind of question about using speculative literature to reflect on our current situation with questions about racial injustice, embedded white supremacy, and corrupt power. A lot of really good stuff is speaking to these kinds of themes in 2020.
Yeah. Now, if you want to talk about corporate space, that's another corporate type thing there too in the future. But
Yeah,
I have seen all the Expanse and all the Mandalorians, and I, really enjoying them both. I think some of the interesting things about the Expanse that I noted was that um, you've got almost a parallel to what was the Cold War
mm-hmm.
for us, that really weird kind of fragile balance of power that's going on. And at the same time, they're trying to unravel a really heavy conspiracy that's going on three different levels. Each one of the Belters versus Mars versus Earth are all involved in some kind of a conspiracy in their own worlds for some other end. And I find that really intriguing. And then you've got the situation in the season now where Amos and Alex have gone back home, basically. And to me, that reminds me of some of the problems of the hero's journey, like Frodo encounters. You can't go back. After you've gone out and done this stuff, going back's not going to work. And how do you confront that? And it's really a great character, developing story for that. I mean, they went down the rabbit hole and they're trying to come back, and it's like Alice, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You can't
Yeah,
go
no,
back
I
to
think
that.
a lot of the developments of the characters in the Expanse right now, and also the book that this is a lot of the material in the current season is based on book 5 of the the season. Um, what's interesting about all of this, you know, Chris, you were talking about like new stories, and something that I really appreciated about the Expanse is that here's another sort of spoiler alert about what's going on in this current season, right? One of the Belter factions run by Marco Inaros has decided that the way to really sort of make a name for the Belters, that is the humans that live on the outer rim of the solar system, the way to make a real name for them is to essentially do a terrorist action on Earth that has extinction level ramifications, right? So they sort of they take a bunch of asteroids and they fling them at Earth to cripple the Earth, while at the same time they're crippling the power in Mars and on the belt. But there's a storyline that takes place both in the novels and in this current season about what happens to Earth when it's hit by these huge asteroids that wipe out millions, if not billions, of human beings. And so, it's this kind of thing, like thinking, it's an interesting story, like what happens to humanity when we push out into space and then we decide that the greatest terrorist act we can do is to destroy our own home planet, and what are the political existential ramifications of that. So I have to admit, I have not read past book 5 of the series, so I know it goes past this, so there's more story to tell after Earth gets bombarded. But just thinking, that sort of idea just sort of blew my mind, to think about, like, what would it take for a human being to destroy its own planet in that kind of way for political ideology. So I like the Expanse in terms of trying to think about these new ideas. But I wanted to ask something that you mentioned. I was thinking about this too, Chris. The sort of way in which the Mandalorian is taking Star Wars and taking it into TV. And I really like the Mandalorian because I think that it explored, it wasn't just doing the kind of cowboy western sci-fi thing that's very typical in sci-fi, right? The cowboy trope, the western trope. But there were some really interesting things in terms of casting new light on terms of what the New Republic is about, and questions about colonialism and racism and all these kinds of things. And so I was really taken that there's some interesting things going on in The Mandalorian. And I was wondering, because I've never really found these themes as much in Star Wars, the movies.
Yeah, no.
And so the TV format allows it to be able to do something, explore different kinds of stories, and really go deep into the universe in ways that I don't think the movie really allows it. And so I was thinking about this, that it's just the same way for Star Trek. Star Trek, of course, starts off as the episodic TV series now for over 50 years. And some of the movies are good, but most of the really good movies are more action oriented, less on the sort of philosophical stuff that makes Star Trek, what gives Star Trek its name. Star Trek, its name is the sort of philosophical sci-fi is because it's a TV show and has that space to do that kind of exploration. And now Star Wars has that space. And I think that it's being able to sort of do more of that kind of deep exploration of human themes and human stories and political stories in a way that the films, I suppose in some ways, never really spoke to me in that way. I was wondering what you both thought about that idea. What is Star Wars as TV? Does it allow it to do new stories in this universe that we've never been able to see before?
I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's being written by Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau instead of Loris Kasdan.
Yeah.
Younger writers grew up with Star Wars and kind of know what they want rather than, an octogenarian kind of writing it. But again, they did bring in Ahsoka Tano at the second to last one. I thought that was really awesome.
Yeah, I felt that was really well done too. When we talk about fan service, I was like, oh, they're going to bring her back. Is it going to be weird? And it was really good.
Because in the canon, she does have this whole life as a gray Jedi,
yeah,
and the things that she does. And the fans would know that when she was in Clone Wars, she had her green lightsabers, and all of a sudden in this thing, they're white. And that's a choice she makes in the canon. So that was really nice fan service. And Rosario Dawson, I thought, was just really strong and powerful too. And
and one thing I'll give a thumbs up for The Mandalorian is all the strong women characters.
Oh yeah.
Even though we've got a man protagonist, I just feel there's so many really good, strong women characters in that show. And then at the end, when they're trapped, I mean, he's in there with 4 women. It's a one man and 4 women, and I really applauded that. Like, I really appreciate strong women characters.
And the thing is, not just women characters, but they're Mandalorian women. These are professional soldiers,
right? Yeah.
And one of them is the potential leader of Mandalorian, except by a quirk of fate. So I'd like to know how Moff Gideon ended up with that black lightsaber, though, because I thought that had been in the hands of Darth Maul at one time too, and I might be missing something because I haven't seen the last 3 seasons of the Clone Wars. So I
Right,
don't know
yeah.
what happened yet. So don't spoil it.
I haven't actually I haven't watched those. I haven't watched the end of those Clone Wars either. So there's just a lot of it, right?
Yeah. Those seasons are 22 episodes long in some
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah, it's sort of been intimidating for me as well to sort of get into that, because I don't know if I have the time commitment to get into all that work.
And
Well,
it's animated too. So it doesn't, honestly, animation like that doesn't engage me as much as real people.
Yeah. No, I agree. You don't get the sort of full sense of performance and see that sort of artistry that come out. Well, so the other thing I wanted to know, if there was anything that any sort of other kind of speculative fiction that spoke to you this year. What I wanted to throw out to suggest was that I found a book that came across me. I'm in a book club with some of my high school friends that we started because of pandemic times. So I probably would have never picked this up on my own. But one of my friends knew the author and suggested it. And so we read it together and I really enjoyed it. So I'm not a big one for young adult fiction in general in this kind of way. But the novel that we read together, I think was really interesting, really new and innovative work. And so the work is The Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. And it's gotten a lot of really good press from NPR chose it as one of the best books of 2020, something to take a look at. And it's a story of a young trans man who is trying to find his place in a culture of brujos, Latinx witches in Los Angeles. And he conjures up the spirit of a young dead boy and then has to try to figure out how to put his soul to rest. And there's a lot of intrigue and a lot of interesting stuff about brujeria, drawing from a lot of different forms of Latinx sort of alternative spiritualities and stories of La Santísima Muerte. And so really, really interesting stuff. And also just this kind of, what I liked about this too, is there's a lot of exploration of a young person trying to deal not only with the issues of adolescence and all the difficulties of adolescence, but in trying to understand the difficulties of being trans in a traditional culture, while at the same time dealing with adolescent issues, while at the same time trying to deal with this alternative spiritual world, and all of it going back and forth very seamlessly. So I thought it was just a really, really brilliant first novel from Aidan Thomas. And so I really like the way in which it was imaginatively trying to weave together a new universe throughout all of these kinds of universal themes, but also just really, really humanizing the ways in which someone coming to understand their trans identity, how that can be liberating. And it was a really beautiful work. So my vote for young adult fiction would be Cemetery Boys. Did you all find anything that spoke to you this year that you would like to mention in that way? Chris?
No, actually, I'm always about 4 years behind when it comes to novels, because as a theater professor, I read way more plays than anything else. So usually it has to be like, I'm reading old, I'm like 4 or 5 years behind. So I really don't have anything new. All I can say is, like, I reread Dune this summer.
Oh yeah.
In preparation for the film that's now gonna not come out.
Who knows when? Yeah.
Right.
I did a reread of Dune about 2 years ago, and I think I went through the first 3. But I think Dune is one of those things that is always worthwhile to turn to. So, and for some reason, a lot of people, I think, probably preparing for the film, were doing a lot of rereads of Dune this year. So I've talked to a lot of people that have been doing that. Randy, what about you?
Well, it's interesting you're talking about that story and the Latin spirituality. There was another kind of a fantasy thing that was on HBO, I think, this year. Excuse me, or no, wasn't HBO, it was on Showtime. Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, that dealt with a very similar thing with Natalie Dormer as the kind of the spirit of death or something, and playing 3 or 4 roles that was really powerful like that too. For me, I ended up spending most of my COVID time reading noir fiction instead, but I did recently get for Christmas and read Watch How I Soar, which is the early life of Hoban Washburn from the Firefly universe. How it's written is the life flashing before his eyes at the moment of his death, when he dies in the film Serenity, about all the things that he had done as a younger person, but then what he had hoped to have in his life that would never occur, which is the birth of his child. And the other thing that I found interesting, always get Star Wars Insider every month, they started to serialize one of the novels that are recently coming out now. I think there's 5 of them coming out, called The High Republic, which will be, again, what Lucasfilms will be working with, or with Disney, probably a prequels 200 years before episode 1 through 3. And so they're kind of setting up what that High Republic is like, and how the Jedi were prior to being involved in politics so heavily. And so I've been sitting reading that serialization as the magazine comes out. And that was, good stuff. I'm not one of the ones to read the Star Wars novels usually, but it's been interesting, kind of learning what led up to Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon going to the small planet Tatooine and finding young Luke.
Yeah,
Young Anakin, I'm sorry.
The novel universes for Star Trek and Star Wars are so vast that it's really, those are intimidating to try to sort of get into in some way, to find a foothold to understand all those kinds of worlds. I mean, I think that both of these franchises have sort of made it easier by saying that canon really is only what's appeared on screen. At least Disney now has sort of come to that. Paramount for a long time has always said, if it's on screen, then it's canon for Star Trek. And so, but otherwise, right, the universes are just as expansive in so many different ways because of the novelizations.
I'll throw this out for Chris too. I mean, because I think she'd have an opinion on this, because, well, you too, Joseph, we're all watched The Mandalorian, that all this fan chatter that's out there is that basically The Mandalorian saved the Star Wars franchise.
It did for me.
Yeah.
I think, it's a new story, new characters. It's really well done. It's like you said before, it's exploring issues in the way that Star Wars, like the film, a film of Star Wars never did. And what you said, Randall, like it's people who are, my age writing Star Wars. So it's people who, it's like, if I were to go out and write a Star Wars, it might be similar to that. So it's almost like people are, I'm the, I feel like it's marketing to me because it's by people who are essentially me, right? I'm excited to see what, I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm excited to see what Disney does next, right? Like,
well, I think it's interesting, the Mandalorian, that the Mandalore culture is really interesting, and it gave people a lot of things to think about. It's not a people, it's a creed that you're brought into, or you accept a lifestyle not that much different than being a Jedi. You're taking these oaths to do a certain thing, and then you either live by that code or you don't. And we see the Mandalorian, Din Djarin, conflicted with that. To the end, Grogu, the child, is more important to him. He takes that helmet off. And before, he wouldn't do it before the women warrior, who were not part of the Watch. They're that other Mandalorian culture, the old or the new guard. And yet he takes his helmet off. And that is a huge, thing. And you can see how conflicted, where he had to take it off once before when he was having tea or something with, the Republic guys. And I think, and Pablo Pascal is such a powerful actor too. Even with the uniform on, you couldn't see his face, you could still know what was going on. And then when it comes off, it's that spoiler at that end of that last episode was so moving.
It was
so powerful.
And that, that's one thing. When I watched the first season, I was really impressed by Pedro Pascal too, because I spent a lot of time acting in a mask, and it's not easy. It forces you to use your body in a different way. And of course, I'm coming from a theatrical background, but I mean, if you can really express a character and emotions still with a mask and a costume on like that, I mean, it's really well done. It's really well acted and directed.
Well, so let's talk then about we've been talking about stuff that we're looking forward to. Let's talk about stuff that might be coming out in 2021 that you're looking forward to in terms of science fiction. So, Randy, what are you looking forward to in 2020 in terms of new storytelling?
Wow, new storytelling. Gosh, Mandalorian season 3. To finish out the Expanse, I know that next year will be the end. They're going to do a season 6, and one of the characters, of course, is not going to be coming back this year, for reasons beyond the show.
Right.
And so that's going to be interesting what they're going to do storytelling wise with that. I know it'll seem weird, but I think it's sci-fi. I'm a Rick and Morty fan, and I'm waiting for the next season of Rick and Morty. I think that's something I actually really look forward to when it comes out, the new season. That's all great, new Rick and Morty. A lot of that has to do with working with students. I mean, Joseph, and Chris, we're all working with younger people, and I think it's important to stay up on what interests them as well, and to find that interest in my own heart as well. Dune, I think, if it is released, would be interesting. I've heard scuttlebutt that they're going to make the 4th Riddick as well.
Oh, right.
And they've been replaying those things every other night on television recently. But I always thought that the second one, the Chronicles of Riddick, was very interesting and very well written, with the necromancer culture, to come up with this incredibly new culture with ships that looked different and a religion that was different. And I thought that was really well done. I would hope they would do a number 4 with as much creativity in a different direction. So,
good. What about you, Chris?
I know Randall set up a Dune. I love Dune, and I hate it. I watched the Dave Lynch Dune, and it's just, the design's great, but it tells the story so poorly.
Yeah.
And then there's the Sci-Fi miniseries, which tells the story great, but it's missing some stuff. And so for years and years, I'm like, is the technology good enough for us to do a Dune remake yet? Can we someone please do a Dune? And then Denis Villeneuve, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but when they announced that he was going to do it, it was going to be like 3 movies. I'm like, oh, I can't wait. And well, I'm still waiting.
We're all still waiting for that.
And I don't want to, and it's one of those films, I'm like, I'm going to want to see that in a cinema. I don't know if I want to see that at home, right? I mean, I think Villeneuve is a fantastic sci-fi director, and his films have just a beautiful aesthetic that really, I think I want to see in a movie house rather than at my home. But I'm interested in seeing what Disney does with Mandalorian and Boba Fett. I don't know when the Boba Fett is supposed to come out. I'm going to assume next year, but who knows? Also, I know I told you I didn't like Picard, but I'm going to watch.
We did a whole video about that one. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to watch Picard.
Yeah.
And, anything Star Trek, I'll take my money.
Yeah. 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 No, I think the Book of Boba Fett's coming out at the end of 2021. I think, if that's correct. I think I heard. I think for me, the thing that I'm most excited about, I'm gonna watch all of this. I'm gonna finish watching out The Expanse. I think the 2nd season of Lower Decks is coming out at the beginning of 2021, and I'd like to see what they're going to do with that. This is many people have said this is the Star Trek version of Rick and Morty. And what's interesting is, like, in my class on Star Trek and philosophy, Rick and Morty always comes up People, you're right, Randy. People are watching the show a lot. I'm not familiar with the show very much at all. I think I saw the Pickle episode.
Pickle Rick.
The
Pickle
Pickle
Rick.
Rick, yeah.
I saw that one and I was like, oh, that's cool, but it didn't draw me in enough to sort of do it. But my students love Rick and Morty, and so
Well, as a scientist too, he's always dealing with real science, dimensional stuff that quantum mechanics deals with.
this is what I've heard.
I think that cartoon is. I've seen all of them. Yeah, I'm a big Rick and Morty fan, but man, some of them are just brilliant. Right? They make references to things where I'd say you'd have to be a well-educated person to understand these jokes. I think there are moments where it's not just a funny haha, but they have deep emotional moments. Because I actually just watched the last season, and there's one where he finds out, or I can't remember, he gives him a thing to restart his life.
Yes.
And I was like crying, right? Like, I'm just like, this is one of the most brilliant cartoons, whatever, sci-fi things I've ever seen. Anyway.
I have my students watch 2 episodes in the science fiction class because they are the complete arc of the hero's journey in 22 minutes. And, that's really cool to be able to put that kind of a thing in a short cartoon and go through the entire.
Demonstrate that narrative. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the big thing for me that I'm looking forward to, I think is going to come out in 2021, but I'm not sure, is the new Star Trek series. There's 2 new Star Trek series that are going to be starting in addition to all of these, right? One is the Section 31 show with Emperor Philippa Georgiou, who is a character I love. She has made Discovery for me, and so she's getting her own show now. But the thing that I'm looking forward to, and I'm ambivalent about this because, it's Star Trek: Strange New Worlds.
Yeah. Oh man, you're right. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's coming out next year, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm torn by this because on the one hand, it's new, but on the other hand, when I was thinking about this is that this is really the fruition of Gene Roddenberry's idea, 60 some odd years ago, right? His Star Trek was Captain Pike, #1, Mr. Spock on the Enterprise. That was the original pilot episode in 1964. And so now it finally gets made into a series, right, in 2021. And so, you're going to be able to see what that vision might have looked like for Roddenberry way back then. But I'm torn because it is also one of these things where, again, we're going back in the Star Trek universe. We're really hemmed in a lot by canon about what can be done in this time period. How much real new storytelling can we do in this kind of way with these kinds of characters? I love the idea of being able to think about young Spock, but a friend of mine and I were arguing about this. She told me, I'm tired of Spock. It's like Spock is in every damn thing, and I'm just tired of him. I want new stories.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I appreciate that. I really do appreciate, not like you were saying, Chris, before, of not having to regurgitate characters and in order to do poor fan service.
Right, and so that's the thing. It could be. What? I'm sorry, Joseph?
No, I'm torn, right? Because it's like, it could be good, or it could be just like, this is just really cliche ridden, and there's no new imaginative stories being told here, exploring new areas. It's just sort of retelling old scripts with new characters with fancy new lens flares. And so I'm ambivalent about what to think about that, because I really want some sci-fi that's going to move us in new ways. One thing that has sort of come up that I'm interested in, I don't know if this is going to be in 2021, but I know that they're working on the filmed version of the 3-Body Problem, Chinese science fiction. I don't know if any of you have looked into this series, a really imaginative work from Chinese science fiction, but the production has hit some snags because it seems that maybe one of the actors poisoned one of the other actors and killed him. I don't know. It's something I just saw a look about this, but if any of you are interested in some really interesting stuff, some hard science fiction, you might really appreciate this stuff. The 3-Body Problem, and I think that film was slated to come out in 2021, but now Murder on the Scene, I don't know if it's going to happen.
Wow.
Well, you know, something I was thinking about too, because Chris was mentioning this about the Mandalorian. He talked about Dave Filoni and, you know, Jon Favreau writing, is that you can tell that they have a knowledge of entertainment, whether it's television or motion pictures, in the writing, because there's been all these little Easter eggs that are thrown in there as well. There was one when Mando does something for Quill and takes care of, you know, some bad guys, you know, mercenaries in this valley he lives in. And at the end, it just jumped out at me so much when he turns to Mandalorian and says, "Now there's no more guns in the valley." That's right out of Shane. That's the last, you know, basically, you know, sentence of the movie Shane, which then is quoted in Logan, science fiction movie as well. Daphne Keene's character says that when after Logan dies. So I think that to me, I have an appreciation of that someone has, you know, interest in the history of their craft, that they've seen these classic things and are willing to tie those little nuggets in, and a clever viewer and listener can pick those things up. And I think that's, like I said, again, says a lot about those people producing, writing, and directing those. And I also noticed, Chris, I don't know if you noticed some of the people who directed The Mandalorian too.
Yeah, they got some really good directors doing
Bryce
that.
Dallas Howard was one of them as well. You know, Ron Howard's daughter.
Robert Rodriguez.
Yep. So
Yeah.
it's great they're spreading out all these different directing
Yeah.
styles to
People
everybody.
I know, like, probably really good directors are like, oh, I want to go stab at directing an episode of that, right? I'm sure lots of good directors are like, I want to direct a Star Wars movie, but they're only putting out, you know, a couple Star Wars, but but a whole season. I mean, you can get a good director on every one of those.
Yeah. Plus the actors doing, like you mentioned, the cameos. You know, even if they're just wearing a stormtrooper thing, they want, you know, they want to be in there.
I loved, like, the first episode of The Mandalorian season 1. They had Brian Posehn. Is that how you pronounce his name? Posehn. I can't remember how you pronounce, but he's a comedian, and he's like driving a little, you know, speeder, like from New Hope, and I'm just like, dude, is that Brian Posehn? Like, what's he doing in this, right? And Amy Sedaris. I mean, like,
John Leguizamo. Yeah, there's been a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of them in heavy makeup, so you don't know who they are, or behind a mask. But yeah, it's one of these things where people want to sort of do a spot at least. So that's become exciting to see people be able to do something artistic differently, because, you know, again, if you're in the mask or in the makeup, it's really exciting to see. Sort of like Doug Jones, right, on Discovery, right? The amazing kind of work that he's able to do.
Yeah, he's good.
The heavy makeup of Saru. So, well, I want to thank you both for doing this kind of roundup of things we've appreciated in 2020 and the storytelling that we have gained some comfort with in this rough year, and the stories that have spoken to us that speak to some of the issues that are on the front page. So I look forward to more conversations with you in the coming year about some of these stories, and to explore more deeply the ways in which sci-fi can help us make sense of, understand, and envision the future. So I want to wish you both a really safe and happy new year. And I look forward to conversations with you in 2021.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Great to see you again too, Chris.
Yep. Good to see you too.
And thank you all for coming in and sharing some time with us and letting us talk with you a little bit about the ways in which we've been affected by sci-fi speculative fiction in 2021. If you're interested in finding out more about the Inaris Project, you can find us on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook at Inaris Project. You can also check out our website at inarisproject.org. We'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and leave us a comment down below. Let us know what you appreciated in imaginative science fiction storytelling this year. Let us know what you thought about some of our comments, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Thanks, everyone.
Stay shiny.
Live long and prosper, everyone.